Hello Inform Scotland followers and friends. I have just updated the latest stats on the informscotland.uk website. You can find it under graphs, and the date that I put on it was the 7th of September because that was the last stats that I updated. Now, I think the statistics that I put on today are bonkers, to be honest. Really, really bonkers. I'll just show you the graphs on my iPad here. As I've said on my own YouTube channel, I think, we are in our 5th wave of coronavirus in Scotland. Look at that. This latest wave here compares to the first wave in April. We are more than 10 times as many, well, actually nearly 20 times as many cases daily now as we had back in the only wave in which we've seen corresponding excess deaths since this pandemic started. Now, even the last wave, which was our biggest, the 4th wave, we're now at more than, well, twice the level in terms of daily cases. So that's the first graph I've shown. It's not as simple as we're just doing lots more testing because positivity has gone very high. This is the percentage positive. The start date on this graph's later than the last one, so there's only 4 waves visible here. It looks like we have peaked and coming back down, but look at that positivity level. It's higher than the January level. Now, what we saw in the autumn was sort of a kind of normal looking epidemic. And we think, it seems like that was a residue from any infections which hadn't been acquired in the first wave, were acquired in the second wave. And that looked fairly normal. It was subsiding. And then vaccinations kicked in. And just like we saw in many, many places all around the world, and we're continuing to see, the result of that was an absolutely enormous surge in cases. Then in July, we reached nearly the same level of positivity, and now in August and September, we have exceeded the January wave. This is quite extraordinary for summertime, not normal because vitamin D levels and susceptibility to coronaviruses go hand in hand. So when they're inversely proportional to one another. So when vitamin D levels should be relatively high, we should have less coronavirus susceptibility. Of course, we've screwed around with immunity probably by locking down. Obviously, there has been some sort of vaccine effect. Anyway, this is all available. You're welcome to disagree with me if you have any alternative explanations. I've just sort of added in here, it was a bit of a last minute decision to put this in the blog, so it's graph 2.1, I've labelled it. This is positivity by day of the week. Now, we see this very strange pattern, it's been very consistent. Your likelihood of testing positive depends on the day of the week that your test is reported, which is strange. We're still seeing Monday and Tuesday and Sunday are the highest positivity days. But what you can see here is that this is the highest, like generally our positivity has been really since this epidemic started. I've not included the first wave because we were doing so much less testing then, it's a bit distorted, but you can see here that we have been consistently very high in our positives returned in this last wave. We're approaching 15%. So then, sorry, I can't get out of my, something very extraordinary has been happening with testing, which you can see in graph 3. The red spikes are NHS tests, so you can see that very gradually they increased and they've got to quite a high level, which they've remained at for some months now. The blue lines are community tests. Now look at the number of community tests we've been doing recently. In my discussion, this is, I mean, truly extraordinary, absolutely gigantic numbers of community tests daily. You're talking about like 45,000 tests a day we have reached twice. Now, when you think the population of Scotland is 5.5 million, that is an absolutely colossal number of tests. So in the last few weeks, we've tested hundreds of thousands of people in the community. And we're seeing a corresponding rise in positivity, which I have shown in graph 4. Now, graph 4, I'm not quite sure what to make of this. That's the turquoise line is tests conducted and the red line is positives. Number of positives reported. Now, there's a wee bit going on here. There's two different axes, so that's why the scale looks similar even though the numbers are very different. So this is tests on this side and positives reported on this side. Now, what you see is that actually since this time here, the number of tests conducted, so that's October 2020, the number of tests conducted has been reasonably steady until July this year. Right, so you can see it jumps about a lot week by week, but basically it's been pretty consistent. And what you've seen there is that there was a peak there, which was October in positives. And then there was a peak again in January, which is the vaccine wave. And then there was a peak in July, and now we've got this massive peak here. Now, those peaks are relatively independent, it seems, of the number of tests conducted. Obviously, we saw a bit of a signal here in July where the number of positives reported has peaked coincidentally with the number of tests conducted. But in this last wave, the number of tests conducted has gone up really substantially. I mean, hugely. We're talking about 3 times the number of tests being conducted now compared to all this time, from, October 2020 to July this year. And at the same time as we've seen that massive increase in number of tests, you've got a massive increase in number of positives. Now, that is strongly indicative that the number of tests we are conducting is pulling up now the number of positives we're getting back. And we haven't seen that prior to these summer waves. Now, as I've said in my blog a number of times there, obviously, if you have a true outbreak of infections, and I personally know lots of people just now who are sick with COVID, or with COVID symptoms, if you have an outbreak, then you're going to do more tests because more people are going to present for tests. But the more people who present for tests, and then the more contacts they get in touch with, and then they go and get tests, you are going to see more false positives. And as we know, we're still not correcting for that in any meaningful way whatsoever. So there's a bit of I don't know what to call it, a chicken and egg situation here. And I am aware of that. But it's just that this is very striking. This last wave here is coinciding with a massive increase in tests. Now, the next graph is positivity. So that's percentage positive against number of tests. So in this case, the blue line is the percentage positive of new tests. And the red line is number of tests conducted. And you see much the same thing that I've just been discussing. So here in October, November and January, the vaccine wave, you've seen a similar number of tests being conducted. And these two peaks had absolutely nothing to do with the number of tests being conducted. But now we're seeing when tests conducted rose, we saw a corresponding increase in number, the positivity coming back. And also, even more so in this latest wave. Now, these are community tests, so not including NHS tests. So that's kind of backing up what I was saying earlier on. I think probably lands more in favour of the argument that it's the testing that's bringing up positives rather than it solely being because of a true outbreak. But I think there is a true outbreak as well. It's just that the size of that outbreak is being exaggerated by the testing. Please feel free to disagree with me or make counter arguments and let us know. I have been totally overwhelmed recently with both personal things and Inform Scotland things, so I'm not doing very well answering comments, but hopefully some other people on the team in Inform Scotland are going to start taking that on. And please don't be cross. DM me on Twitter or in the Inform Scotland account, because I'm more likely, if I'm not answering you, do hassle me on Twitter. Graph 6. There's so many graphs here and I've got so much to say, sorry. Graph 6 shows hospital occupancy in the blue line. Now you can see again for August we are heading for the ceiling here. I think it looks very much like we are approaching soon. We're approaching soon the number of people that we had in hospital with COVID last October, November. This is quite worrying as far as I'm concerned for the summertime. Daily delayed discharges are also increasing. Now, they have been very steady for a long time. That's the green line here. They've been very steady for a long time, but they're increased by 50% compared to last October. Delayed discharges are people who have no clinical reason to be in hospital. They're just stuck there for whatever reason. So it kind of puts the number of people in hospital with COVID in perspective. That's the purpose of that line. And the yellow line is deaths. Now, obviously, you can see a trace there for deaths in the summer months. I'm going to skip to graph 8. This graph shows deaths in 2020 by month or by date. That's the blue line. And then you can see deaths in 2021 with the red line. We had no deaths all summer last year, basically. Our deaths were at 0 for weeks and weeks and weeks. This summer, we have deaths. That might be because we're over assigning COVID cases to people as they're dying. But this is not good news for the summertime. I can't sugarcoat it. It shouldn't be happening. It didn't happen last summer because when vitamin D levels rise, coronavirus infections should become less severe. Back to graph 7. This, again, there's so much to say about these graphs because the sort of the multiple layers of poor practice they're just astonishing. So this graph here, the black line, is positive tests. And you can see here, that we've got this huge peak happening now. But the thing that's interesting about this is there's two different axes here. So we've got ITU and deaths on this side. That's the red and the yellow line. And then we've got positive tests and hospital occupancy on the other side. What you can see there from the black line is that as the positive test kind of pulled up hospital occupancy and ITU occupancy and deaths. And that makes sense. So you're seeing an outbreak there and people are getting sick and they're going to the hospital and they're getting really sick and unfortunately some of them are dying. Now, you can see that those peaks are all kind of pulling up together. Now with this nonsense that's going on here, again, you can see there's like a double peak in ITU occupancy and there's a double peak in hospital occupancy, and you can see there's a sort of it's hard to tell because the death numbers are they're quite small numbers. There's a double peak happening there as well, so it is matched to a certain extent, but you can see that the relationship's sort of inverted. So now the black curve is the biggest one. What this and the red and blue and yellow traces are getting relatively smaller. What this is telling you is that if you're testing in order to prepare the hospitals, or it's not preventing infections, is it? Because we're going through the roof with infections. So the testing and tracing isn't preventing infections. A big argument for doing lots of testing is that you're preparing the hospitals. But we're now having to do so much testing to find the cases that end up in hospital. My question is, what's the point? Why are we bothering with this? We're isolating people, disrupting people's lives, creating absolute chaos in society and in our hospitals with staff self-isolating. And there's an ever less benefit to all of this. So skipping on to graph 9, this is hospital occupancy. 2020 is the blue line and 2021 is the red line. And look how many more people we have in hospital now compared to this time last year. Now, the Scottish Government was overcounting hospital occupancy in 2021, and that's what this step is all about. They were overcounting because the people, if they ever tested positive, I think they were still counting them, so they were never coming off. If they were in hospital long term, they were never coming off the list. It turned out that actually the number of people in hospital was like 42 in the whole country. Now we have, when they corrected it, now we have 805 people in hospital with COVID in Scotland today or yesterday, when we had 42 last year. I don't know why people aren't questioning why that is in the summertime. I'm like a broken record, I know. Graph 10 is IT occupancy by region. You can see, the big one in April, and then the next two big ones in the winter, and then this is recently. So what we have is quite a noisy signal there, but still, thankfully, there aren't many people in ITU with COVID. However, if you look at the hospital occupancy, what you're seeing is we are actually approaching in all regions, this includes all the regions in Scotland, this graph, we are approaching similar levels to what we saw in October and January, or autumn and January last year, or autumn, January, February. And Glasgow is increasing very fast in hospital occupancy. Why are so many people sick with COVID just now, when we have, it's summertime and we have lots of people vaccinated? I don't know. Here are the vaccination figures. The red line and the blue line, the blue bars are cases. The yellow line is vaccination, the first vaccinations, and the green line is second vaccinations. And you can see that they really are flattening off. Every day we're doing sort of fewer and fewer of both doses of the vaccine as we run out of people to vaccinate or treat with a gene therapy. The orange line at the top is the sort of population of Scotland. So you can see the fraction of people who the government has counted as vaccinated. You would think that when we had that number of people vaccinated with a vaccine that reduces, it's not a vaccine really, it's a therapy, you've treated that number of people with a therapy which lessens disease severity, you would not expect to see 16 times as many people in hospital now as were last year. But that's where we are. And this bar chart, blue is first doses daily and red is second doses daily. We've been limping along with a few stragglers getting their first doses for some time now, and obviously as people, the population gets saturated with people prepared to get a first dose, the number of second doses is now declining as well, and that will continue to happen now. There's some news that apparently we're expecting Whitty to overrule the JCVI ruling and say that children do need to be vaccinated. So maybe in Scotland we're about to see a lot more first doses happening, and it will be very interesting in our children. Very interesting to see what happens to hospitalisations when that happens. One of my graph 8 in my blog, this one about the deaths, where we're seeing a lot more deaths this summer than we did last year. I've asked the following questions. Do you think this looks okay. I find the number of deaths in the summer being so much higher than last summer deeply concerning. We have a huge number of people vaccinated now. Are the people dying vaccinated? If so, how are they dying if the vaccine is working to reduce seriousness of disease, especially in summertime when no one was dying last summer? If it's the unvaccinated who are dying, why are they dying now when the unvaccinated weren't dying last summer? Is this virus becoming more virulent against the normal trend for viruses because viruses normally become less severe? If so, why is that happening? If we had listened to those experts who warned against giving a non-sterilising vaccine during an epidemic, we might have expected this, that it would have encouraged the evolution of more potent variants. Maybe there is another explanation for this. Maybe we are all immune deficient from the lockdown, sanitisers, etc. Comments are welcome. When last year we were being told from October that the vaccine was the way out, what did you imagine was going to happen? Did you think that we would have 80% of the population vaccinated and have 805 people in hospital with COVID? There has to come a point where people start to ask themselves, why are all these things happening? If the vaccine is the way out, and it is the way out to the extent that we are now going to implement vaccine passports, then it has to work. And it isn't working. Whichever way you look at it, it's not working. We are having a very severe COVID wave in the summertime. So, how is this vaccine working exactly? It's not. It's not working to achieve the aims that it set out to do. This is not an anti-vaccine message. This is an anti-vaccines that don't work message. And I would just encourage you all, please, share the information that is on Inform Scotland. By all means, put alternative viewpoints out there. Tell me why I'm wrong. All of the members of Inform Scotland seem to agree, so we have consensus on Inform Scotland. What I'm saying is the Inform Scotland viewpoint. So if anybody has a counter argument that works, then please give it to us. And stay sane, stay strong, stay tuned. And remember, I love you. Thank you for your attention for so long. That's a long video. Well done.